I am back, Professor. Welcome back to the show. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm good, Jamal. How are you?
I
Thank you
am
for
doing
having me.
well. We're joined with Professor Mohammed Marandi. He is professor of English Literature, Orientalism at the University of Tehran, and he is a really good friend of the show. I thank you for joining me with us. Um,
My
I
pleasure.
guess we have to start with Ayatollah. So he was given a speech. I was trying to pull up the video, but he was given a speech, and in the speech, he mocked the U.S. and he mentioned basically slapped down the notion of having talks with the United States. As I think I pointed out to you before, I can't say I blame him on this, but give me your take on this. I mean, obviously, the United States attacked Iran in the middle of negotiations. This destroys any notion of credibility in regard to trying to come to some kind of terms of a deal. Is this the thinking on this? Is this the thought process, or is there something else going on in the mindset of Iran in regards to the negotiations or lack thereof with the U.S.?
I've always felt more comfortable with his views on the United States than some other politicians in Iran, and he's always been very skeptical. Even when the nuclear negotiations were taking place, he explicitly expresses skepticism, although he allowed them to take place.
Yes.
Uh, I think he wasn't completely happy with the results, but he allowed the government at that time to move forward because he wanted both that government and ordinary Iranians to see for themselves that his skepticism is not without merit and not without reason. And I think he's been proven right over the years that dealing with the United States really is useless. The United States not only refrains from abiding by its own commitments,
Mm-hmm.
but when it does so, it has the full support of the entire West and the Western media and Western think tanks. They fully support it. So it's not as if when the United States uh, violates agreements that there's an opposition. Let's say the opposition party will rise up and say something, or the media will be outraged, or the Europeans will stand up against the United States. No, whatever they do, everyone will fall in line and blame the other side. So even, for example, right now you have this trade war going on between the United States and China. It's
Yes.
Americans that have been provoking China, but if you listen to the U.S. media, you'd think it's the Chinese that have just suddenly come out and uh, taking, making moves against the United States. The same is true with Russia. The whole negotiating process over Ukraine, the agreements that were signed, the Minsk Accords. The examples that people can put out there to show that the United States is just simply not a reliable partner are 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 many, and you can see them across the world in different parts of the world. And more recently, also, you recall that Iran signed an agreement uh, uh, with the International Atomic Energy Agency in Egypt. And many people were wondering why Iran did that. Well, the Iranians knew that the Americans and the Europeans were not honest and that they were not going to fulfill their side of the bargain. So the Iranians did sign up to the deal so that the other side would be blamed. Sort of like what Hamas did with the fake
Ceasefire.
peace agreement of Trump. What Trump was trying to do is bring about capitulation and humiliation for the Palestinian people. And Hamas took a careful position so that the United States could not blame Hamas and the resistance. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing with the ceasefire is that the Israeli regime is murdering people on a daily basis, just like what they're doing in Lebanon, too.
Mm-hmm.
Just today, they murdered another a young man on a motorcycle, burned him alive. It's not even being told in the Western media because burning uh, Amalek people alive is of no importance. So
Yeah.
uh, his skepticism is founded on on a history of dishonesty and deceit that comes from Washington and its allies. And what he's saying now is that we're not going to negotiate under duress. And he also said if the Trump wants to believe that he destroyed Iran's nuclear program, let him think that way. In other words, he was mocking him, or uh, effectively implying that they have not been able to do the sort of damage that they claim to have inflicted upon the Iranian peaceful nuclear program in an illegal war.
Yeah, illegal is an understatement. This is the clip that I was referencing prior.
ملت ایران زیر بار تحویل نمیره، حزبش معامله نیست. بنشینیم صحبت کنیم و نتیجه این بشود مشخص میکنه. این زورگویی است. ایران رو نمیشه مثل بعضی از کشورهای دیگه با این زورگویی ها تحت تاثیر قرار داد.
Yeah, effectively, it's one thing if we come to terms on the deal. It's another thing when you go into the deal threatening that you're going to attack me if I don't accept your deal. How can anybody negotiate under those terms? And considering that the
Exactly.
U.S. did attack.
Yeah, exactly. So on the one hand, the United States wants to bully Iran, and on the other hand, if after bullying there is a deal, hypothetically, the Americans are not going to carry out their side of the agreement.
Yes.
So it's useless from beginning to end, and I think that's been the story between Iran and the United States for decades. And the reason is, Jamal, is the Israeli regime more than anything else. The United States is not an honest negotiating partner in general. We saw that with Russia. We saw
Yes.
that with China. We've seen that everywhere. But in the case of Iran, it's even more so, because the Israeli regime is always back there. It is really as Bush would say, the decider. They're the ones who are in charge. They're in the driver's seat. They dictate the U.S. foreign policy across West Asia and North Africa. And so the United States can't be trusted under ordinary circumstances, as we've seen across the world. But in the case of Iran, in the case of Palestine, in the case of Lebanon, in the case of the entire region, zero credibility, and only a fool would sit down and sign a deal with the United States and expect it to be fulfilled. I mean, look at Qatar. Qatar is a proxy of the United States. The regime is obedient to the United States. It's no friend of Palestine. If if the United States ordered Qatar to shut down Al Jazeera, you think they'd wait a day? They'd shut it down that day. They'd say when, what time, what hour, how will you give us? How much time will you give for me to go and unplug the whole thing? That's how Qatar works. The only reason why they host Hamas is because the Americans and Israelis wanted them to do so. So Qatar, which has always been obedient, which is during the World Cup, it spent, some say, almost $200 billion. I don't know if that's true,
Wow.
but they were all contractors, were U.S. senators and Congress people, and elites were behind those contractors. They're constantly, and their money goes to the likes of Kushner and Witkoff and others, and they go and invest in Israel. This is Qatar. That is what the Qatari regime is. It is an obedient regime that puts its money in the West, and it obeys the United States. When the Israelis bombed it, did the United States defend the country? No, of course not. Did they condemn the Israeli regime? Did they punish the Israeli regime? Of course not. They didn't even activate their air defenses, even though their most important military base in the entire region is in Qatar.
Yeah.
So they allowed it to happen, and there's no doubt that they knew it was going to happen. So when proxies of the United States uh, cannot count on the United States to abide by its commitments, then what are the rest supposed to do? And I don't know if you know this, you probably do, but the Al Udeid base in Qatar, which is the home to CENTCOM, it is funded by Qatar. It's
Yes.
not as if they've been given a piece of land, the Americans, and they pay for all the costs. No, the Qatari regime pays for all the costs. And a while back, I was listening to Tucker Carlson on his show, and he was very explicit. He said the reason why the United States has this base in Qatar is to protect Israel. So despite all that, when Netanyahu wants to bomb Qatar, the United States does nothing. So that's basically how much credibility the United States has. That, I think, it says it all.
Yeah, if you can't defend your friends, Lord knows you're not going to keep your deals with your enemies.
They don't
Right?
even want to defend your friends. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm curious on something. You pointed out that a lot of this policy is driven effectively by Israel. And of course, Israel went within the 12-day war. The United States came to his rescue after taking a beating, the worst beating of its life for those 12 days. And there is a widespread belief that Israel is not finished. I mean, this is just a ceasefire, right? So for all intents and purposes, the belief was that Israel was going to resume its attacks. Now, Colonel Wilkerson was just on the show, like maybe an hour ago. And Wilkerson pointed out that, and I know you can't speak to this because this is kind of internal baseball in regards to whatever's taking place on a high level. I don't even know how Colonel Wilkerson knows this, but I'll just explain it in the way that he explained it. That Mossad got back to Netanyahu and pointed out that Iran is working very closely with Russia and China. Whereas the first time Iran was like, look, we got it. We can take care of it. In this case, it seems that the connection between Russia and China has gotten that much more closely aligned. And that this has, let's say, spooked Israel into backing off of an initial attack in the time frame that they were going to go with this particular attack. What is the relationship between Russia and Iran? Has a relationship gotten closer since the 12-day war? And if so, how?
Well, he's a very knowledgeable person. He's a very intellectually honest person. He knows what goes on inside the United States and among elites much better than I. I don't know about this. So I can't comment on this in particular. What I can say is that Iran's offensive capabilities, and you're right, the Americans came to the rescue. During the last 3-4 days, the Israelis were begging for a ceasefire, and the Americans were sending messages to Iran, and the Iranians were ignoring them. And ultimately, the Americans gave a series of concessions that Trump alluded to one of them. If you recall, he said, Iran can sell its oil to China, all of its oil to China. It was basically that was one of the concessions was that the United States would stop harassing Iran in its exports to China, oil exports to China. So, after a number of days, the Iranians accepted not a ceasefire, but a cessation of hostilities. So we don't have a ceasefire with the regime. But yes, the regime lost the war, and it was because of Iran's superior offensive capabilities. Iran ruled the skies over Palestine effectively. And the Americans and the Israelis and the Europeans and regional countries, Turkey's, U.S. bases in Turkey, across the Persian Gulf, they were all collaborating together. Jordan, they were all working together to stop Iranian missiles, but they failed. And so Iran's offensive capabilities were what brought the defeat about for the regime. Iran's defensive capabilities were lacking in the sense that they were not adequate. What I do know is that after the war, the Iranians have been looking to purchase new defense capabilities. I have no doubt that the two countries that Iran would seek to purchase these goods from would be China and Russia for obvious reasons because of the close relationship. And the relationship has gone closer because Russia, Iran, and China all recognize that the United States has gone rogue and that it is lashing out across the board and that it needs to be contained. We see that in Venezuela. They just murder people. And again, the United States has no opposition. Those who foolishly believe that the United States is a democracy with checks and balances, they should begin to open up their eyes. And they're literally slaughtering people without any justification. And two of the people who they tried to murder and they carried out a double tap attack to make sure they're dead, but they failed to kill them. They were arrested and they were released, right? So if they were released, that means that they were innocent. If they're innocent, that means that that boat that they were on was illegally attacked and innocent people were murdered, and that they
Yes.
were not a part of the drug trade. Even if they were part of the drug trade, they have no right to bomb them. But this is, bombing innocent people is a completely innocent people, is a different thing altogether. They've murdered um, non-Venezuelan individuals as well. So the United States has gone rogue, and there's no one stopping them at home. The Europeans are a bunch of yes men. The U.S. media is not going to protest, and the Democratic Party is no real opposition. There's two factions of the same party, basically. So under these circumstances, it's obvious that the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, and others are going to move closer to one another. And that is definitely the case. Iran's relationship with China is stronger today than it was, because both Iran and China recognize the threat that the United States poses for both of them. If Iran is weakened, that's not good for China. If China is weakened, that's not good for Iran. And the same is true with Russia. If Russia is weakened, it's not good for either Iran or China, because the United States will become more aggressive and more uncontrollable and more rogue than before. So, my understanding, and I don't have any uh, insider knowledge, but my
Mhm.
understanding is that Iran is purchasing uh, new equipment, high tech equipment from both Russia and China. Of course, Iran also exports military equipment to Russia, and it imports other equipment. In the case of China, I think it's more of a one-way relationship. Is purchasing certain types of equipment. Of course, Iran's military industry is mostly indigenous. They've
Yes.
developed a vast military industry, but in certain areas where they're lacking, especially when it comes to air defenses, I think that and the Air Force, that they've been putting more money into, let's say,
Defense.
closing
Yeah.
those gaps that currently exist.
I think one of the other interesting things that took place in that war that Iran has responded to was this idea of Mossad agents on the ground. Could you go into that? Because in the very initial, and it seems that Israel had been planning this for a while, and that they burned a lot of the agents that were on the ground in the process of going through the 12-day war, and it still didn't go the way that they intended, which again gives skepticism to any other future war that Israel is going to go through with, considering Iran is fixing those weaknesses. How did Iran go about dealing with the agents that were on the ground that were releasing drones to take down Iranian air defense in the initial days of the 12-day war?
We have to keep in mind that this is not Mossad. This is 50 intelligence agencies, meaning Western intelligence agencies and their proxies in the region, which include the Republic of Azerbaijan. It includes, sadly, NATO member states in our region, meaning Erdogan. His territory has been used by the Israeli intelligence against Iran, the Kurdish area of Iraq, Syria, the Persian Gulf. These countries across the region have been collaborating, Jordan, with the Israelis and Western intelligence agencies. So it's not the Israeli regime itself. Without the collaboration and the support of the West and the United States in particular, it really can't do anything.
Mhm.
But there are two things really. One is that the Israelis, because this was a so-called regime change operation, they gave it their best shot,
Yes,
and
they
so
did.
they used their best missile. They used their best missiles. Uh, are you still there? Because I don't see you.
Yes. No, no, I'm here. I was just giving you
Okay,
the screen
they
since you were, yeah.
right. They used their best equipment. They used their best missiles. They used their best air defenses, and they used their agents on the ground and the agents of and the capabilities of their partners in crime across the West and elsewhere. So, but there was a lot of exaggeration. It wasn't as if there were thousands of people arrested. Uh, I don't know the exact numbers. I don't remember exactly, but a lot of most of the people, from my understanding, who were arrested were people who were just like Afghan refugees who'd come to Iran, and they were working in this small factory, for example, that produces drones. They had no idea what these drones were for, but they were
I see.
working there. So initially they were arrested and then they were released. But the people who were behind these operations, they were the ones who were arrested, and some of them have been executed. So it is going to be much more difficult for the Israeli regime to carry out that sort of operation again anytime soon, because you know quite well. Not that you and I are in intelligence, but we know that these things take many years to develop and
Yeah.
networks to create it, and for traders to be trained and to be prepared to do what it is they do. So there were networks in Iran that were exposed because they came out in the open and were carrying out operations.
Mhm.
But a lot of those, the networks did not. All the people who were effectively working in those networks were not necessarily spies. Some of them were just ordinary people who were caught up in something that they didn't comprehend.
I see. I see. No, that makes sense. That does make sense. I guess my thing is they burned all of those bridges in that attack, believing with infinite hubris that this was going to be the thing that overthrew the government of Iran, and they failed. And any future attack is not going to have those same elements associated with it. Meaning, any future attack is that much harder in order to accomplish. And I guess my thing is,
Oh, definitely.
does Iran still believe that attack is coming, despite that reality? Meaning, they took a beating in 12 days with everything that they had, even a surprise and everything else. And this time around, does Iran still, let's say, anticipate that that attack is brewing? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, how does Iran view all of this as it unfolds?
Well, you know that it's been reported that Netanyahu told President Putin that he does not want to launch another attack.
Yeah,
And while no one in Iran trusts Netanyahu, I mean, if he says it's raining, then you can be pretty sure that you won't need an umbrella that day.
right.
However, having said that, the fact is that it does make it more costly for him to carry out an attack, because that would make President Putin look bad. I, of course, have no knowledge of what happened between the two, but the fact that it's not necessarily the case that the Israeli regime wanted this to go public. It is possible that Netanyahu said this to President Putin, and then President Putin
How did
released
it?
this information to put pressure on the Israeli regime not to carry out an attack. So under these circumstances,
Interesting.
it would be more costly for the regime for Netanyahu to carry out an attack. Personally, my understanding and through conversations that I have with others, the belief is that the Israelis, logically speaking, will not carry out an attack because it is not a war that they can win, and the defeat would be worse than last time because the Iranians will hit harder and they're more prepared.
Yeah,
Nevertheless, since Netanyahu needs war, since he needs crises in order to maintain power and to prevent the court case against him from going forward, anything is possible. So the Iranians are preparing themselves, even though I think many are not predicting an attack anytime soon, but it
yeah.
could happen, and
No,
they
that's
and
fair.
they are preparing for themselves as if it is inevitable and as if it is, you know, soon to happen. But many believe that the regime is not prepared to pay the price.
Basically, they're not that stupid to go through with this again. One last question on
But
this.
then it's Netanyahu.
Right. Well, there's that,
Yeah.
right? Um, One last question on this. Putin met with Jelani, the head chopper in chief in Syria. I take great pains to call him president of Syria since he's effectively self-declared person in this. What is the Iranian perspective of this? With Iran's relationship with Russia, does this in some way affect Iran's relationship with the current Syrian regime. I'm going to call it regime because he's, it just kind of is what it is. How does one allow the other to get closer? What's the point of view of Iran on this?
Well, the Jolani regime is a regime that the Iranians obviously dislike because it is a takfiri regime that is completely infiltrated by Western intelligence agencies.
Right.
Anyone who thought that this was, I mean, some naive people did believe that this was some sort of revolution, and they would call it a blessed revolution. Others who are just so deeply sectarian and full of sectarian hate, trained in these Wahhabi Salafi schools funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar and in some parts of Turkey and Turkey and elsewhere. They're just so full of hate that that their sectarianism blinds them to reality. And these people, no matter what happens, they will never change. But people by now, uh, educated people, people who are objective, people who are looking at the situation in Palestine, they know this is a proxy regime.
Yes.
All they have to do is watch the interview between Jolani and Petraeus, and they were
That was
like two
pathetic.
lovers.
Yeah.
Uh,
That was so pathetic. Yeah.
Petraeus worrying about Jolani's how much his wife Jolani's how well she sleeps at night, and and that he calls her his he says he's one of her biggest fans, and so on. Yeah, that I think is enough because we all know who Petraeus is. I mean, Petraeus is the worst of the worst of the worst, and he was in charge of Iraq. He was in charge of Afghanistan. This is the
Yes.
guy who did all the dirty work and carried out the dirty work in these countries that were occupied.
Now they're
So it's
buddies.
clear for Iran and for everyone who Jolani or Ashara is. Doesn't matter what they call him.
But
But there are a number of things here. One is that Jolani right now, and it's been a while that he's been trying to build bridges with Iran.
oh,
And
so he has been trying to build bridges with Iran. That's what I was kind of
yes,
getting at, whether the relationship with
yes,
Russia in some way affects the relationship between Iran and Syria.
no, he has been trying to build bridges with Iran, and so far the Iranians have not agreed. They've even asked Iran to sell oil because the refinery is in Syria is designed to use Iranian oil, and also the electrical power plants in the country. They were made, many of them by Iran, so they need Iranian equipment, and Iran was unlike the current regimes that are controlling Syria now, Iran was paying out of its own pocket to help Syria. It gave Syria free gasoline. It gave Syria all sorts of assistance in medicine and subsidized their health industry. That is all gone now. The economic situation in Syria today is worse than under uh, Assad, despite all the sanctions that they imposed and all the funding that was being given to these terrorist groups to undermine the government. The situation today is even worse than back then. So they would initially they wanted Iran to even to be prepared to sell or to spare parts and the Iranians said they just said look we're out of this we're not being getting involved.
Hmm.
But
Interesting.
then they have, from my understanding, is that they've gone further. These takfiri, the people who rule over Syria and Ashara, they've been asking for a relationship that goes beyond purchasing goods and so on, which, to my knowledge, the Iranians have not given a positive response so far. I do not know the Iranian position on because I've been traveling, as I've told you,
Hmm.
uh, recently, and I've been a bit busy. I do not know the before the program I told you, but I've been busy, so I don't know exactly what the Iranian position is. But after Jolani went to Moscow, the um, Russian representative for Syria came to Tehran. So I will have to
Interesting.
see. I would assume that the Iranians are not all that excited about the trip to Moscow, but but ultimately Iran's relationship with Russia is far more important than these sort of things, and it's becoming quite clear as we discuss uh, on multiple occasions and after the fall that the new rulers of Syria in Turkey and in Tel Aviv and elsewhere, that they have this now serious a burden on their shoulders. The country is falling apart. It's full of violence. People are impoverished. The situation is worse. And there are many, many, many thousands of foreign fighters there who are a threat. Of course, they are tools of NATO, but they are a threat to the region and beyond. These are tools of NATO that Erdogan, of course, has trained with funding from Qatar.
Mhm.
Tomorrow they can be used across Central Asia to disrupt the Belt and Road. They can be used against China. They can be used against anyone, and that is basically the objective. But there are also internal dynamics inside Syria because as the Jolani regime becomes more openly friendly to the Israeli regime, there are elements within his those factions in his coalition of terrorists that are not happy about this, and that could cause internal strife. So this economic situation is not good, and the divisions within the ruling uh, groups, they could become dangerous. And Iran is very influential, by the way. I mean, Jamal, Iran has many friends inside Syria. Most of the people who fought for the Iranians or under the leadership of the Iranians when they were in Syria were uh, people from Aleppo and that region, and in Damascus and elsewhere, and they are from all the different communities. So, but of course, right now, Iran is not engaging at all. It's not involved because the Iranians don't want Jolani to have any excuse to start slaughtering people and trying to blame Iran for the catastrophic situation that he and his backers have helped create it. So right now, Iran is staying outside of all of this. It's not involved. I would imagine they're not terribly excited about what happened in Moscow, but that's not going to affect the Russian-Iranian relationship.
Separate concerns, effectively. The last topic I want to get to is the ceasefire, quote unquote. Heavy quotes on ceasefire. We've had all of this pomp and circumstance with Donald Trump effectively holding a campaign rally that he called a ceasefire signing. You had all of these governments, these vassal states from Europe show up to this quote unquote
And the region.
ceasefire. Yeah. Yes. Um, and it collapses within a day. Now, nobody calls it that. Nobody says it collapses. But
Yeah.
if you have Israelis stopping aid and murdering Gazans, then that doesn't look like it's a functional ceasefire. Give me your take on this. I mean, how did you ever believe that this was a real thing? Let me start there, and then we can step into it from there. But this was never a ceasefire, correct?
No, you're absolutely correct. It was never intended to be a ceasefire. This was an attempt by the United States to force the Palestinians to capitulate, or if they did not, to make it look as if the Palestinians are unwilling to end, to stop the Holocaust in Gaza. Uh, the reality is that uh, the Netanyahu did not achieve his aims. I mean, he succeeded in slaughtering hundreds of thousands of innocent Palestinians with the help of the collective West and through the complicity of uh, countries in the region that continue to do business and trade with the Israeli regime. But beyond that, he did not succeed. I mean, the resistance in Gaza is very much in place. Hamas, its allies, Islamic Jihad, and others, they're still fighting. And if the Israeli regime could win, Trump would not have put forward this fake peace plan. But Hamas, in order to prevent the United States from using this fake plan, they accepted the plan with reservations, both to end the war, to give people the chance to get food, but also to prevent the United States and and these other genocidal regimes from being able to blame the Palestinians, to blame the victims, and ultimately, what we saw was what was, I think, inevitable from the very beginning, and that was that the ceasefire would not hold because the Israelis, by nature, they do not accept and recognize any agreement, as I discussed earlier, like the United States with Iran. We have when after the ceasefire, which the Israeli regime requested between Lebanon and the Israeli regime, the Israelis have been bombing Lebanon every day, and they're regularly murdering people. As I said, just today they burned a man alive on his motorcycle. This is not in the Western media because the West does not care. Western journalists, mainstream journalists, those who have these hundreds of thousands of followers and millions of followers online, they don't report it because they don't care. They're not the right sort of people. But so when in Lebanon they are carrying out these outrages, of course they're going to do the same in Gaza. And that's exactly what they did. A couple of their soldiers were injured or killed because of their own stupidity. And then they went and started bombing the entire Gaza Strip, massacring more people because for them, Palestinians are dirt. They're animals. They're subhuman. We all know that. That's how it is for Zionism, and that's how it is for their apologists and backers. So when you have such a barbaric regime, and the people who support genocide according to their own polls, then of course we're not going to have a successful ceasefire. And as we are speaking, the Israeli regime refuses to abide by its commitments to allow aid into Gaza.
Yes.
15% of the aid that was promised has gotten through. In other words, the regime continues to use food as a weapon. It continues to use infant formula as a weapon. It continues to use baby food as a weapon. And now there's no fighting because back then they would lie and say there's a war going on and they'd make all sorts of excuses. Now nothing is happening, but they're doing the same thing because they want to starve Palestinian children. And this shows that the collective Western media, how deeply complicit and sinister they are, how sinister Western journalists are at CNN, at the New York Times, at the Guardian, at the BBC, Sky News, and so on and so on, and France 24, how sinister these people are. Because now there is a ceasefire, yet the regime is preventing baby formula from getting into this territory. And still they won't say anything about it. That just shows where they stand, where their regime stand. It shows all we need to know about freedom and democracy and the independent media in the West. All that nonsense has been just like human rights and women's rights and children's rights and all these things that the West always talks about. The masks have been removed. They've exposed themselves for what they really are, and that's why the world has turned against the West. I think you know as well as I, if not much better, that today perceptions about Iran have changed completely because no
Yes.
one believes the Western narrative about Iran before. They now many people recognize that they were lying about Iran for almost 50 years now, and now people are looking to Iran as a hope to help the Palestinian people and at the axis of resistance to help the Palestinian people. Why? Because the West has discredited itself so badly, because Western media has exposed itself so badly. So this is not a ceasefire. And those governments, those states, those leaders that went to Egypt, they have they have they have humiliated their countries and they've committed a major crime against the Palestinian people because they went there to as monkeys in a zoo or as monkeys in a circus for this ringmaster Trump in order to whitewash his crimes.
Yes.
Basically, they went there and they did it for their own interests. To get something from Trump, let's say, I don't know, on tariffs or something from from the United States because they get something to go there. So they used the Palestinian people, they used the Holocaust in Gaza as a means to get something from Trump. Other than that, all they did was whitewash this genocidal maniac and whitewash this Israeli regime that's been carrying out this Holocaust for 2 years with the support of the U.S. and the West. That's all they did, and each and every one of them was humiliated by Trump. I mean, the scenes were just ridiculous and sometimes difficult to watch. Even me, I mean, I despise uh, these people, but to see the British Prime Minister humiliated, and then another leader humiliated, one after another. It's just sometimes difficult to watch.
I personally
But
enjoy it.
yeah,
I hate these people, right?
yeah, I hate them too. But it's just sometimes it's just so embarrassing.
It is.
You feel embarrassed about something that has nothing. I don't know. Maybe not everyone feels that way, but sometimes you watch something online and
Yeah.
someone is humiliated and you don't even know the person, but it's just you don't want to see it,
Well, it
even if
depends
you
on
don't
what it.
like the person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Depends
but
on what it.
in any case, they humiliated themselves,
Yeah.
and
Agreed.
but they all betrayed the Palestinian people by doing so.
Yeah. Last question. Do you foresee all of these Middle Eastern states that were supposed to create a peacekeeping force in Gaza? Do you ever foresee that taking place?
It's difficult to imagine what's going to happen in the coming days and weeks, but anyone who goes to Gaza, if they are used as a tool against the Palestinian people, I don't think their regimes will last.
Yeah.
So I find it hard to believe. Remember, Hamas is underground. Islamic Jihad is underground, and I have no doubt that as we speak, Iran will continue to support them so that they can build more tunnels, build more capabilities for whenever the Israeli regime decides to restart the genocide. So if anyone wants to help the Israeli regime with the occupation of Gaza, they will not succeed. They
Which is
will
what it
not
would be.
succeed where the Israeli regime did not succeed.
Yeah.
But if countries are willing to help the resistance and help the Palestinian people, and with full coordination, and they coordinate their efforts with the resistance, with Hamas in particular, which is the ruling force, that's a different thing altogether. But none of these countries have ever given any assistance to the resistance before. They haven't provided them with a single bullet in
Right.
these years, and they supported Trump's fake peace plan from day one. So I don't have any optimism. The only actors that I trust are the Axis of Resistance. They've shown their willingness to sacrifice over the last 2 years, and Iran has, of course, sacrificed for many decades through sanctions and through other uh, forms of hostility coming from the West. The same is true with Hezbollah and Ansarullah. But other than the axis of resistance and the general resistance across the world, the public opinion and activists across the world, I have no faith in any of these governments. They've done much more harm than good. If they
Professor.
really cared for the Palestinian people, they would have cut off ties with the Israeli regime a long time ago. They would have cut off business. Imagine if just these regimes that were in Cairo, if they cut off relations with the Israeli regime, all relations, trade, political relations, all business relations, where would things be today?
Yeah.
It'd be a completely different situation.
You're so right. Professor, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate these conversations. I'm always illuminated at the end of these. And just for the audience, Professor Mohammed Marandi, he is Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Professor, you have a fantastic rest of your night. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Jamal. Always an
All right.
honor. Thank you.
Excellent. Bye-bye. All right. We have come to, if I can bring myself back, there we are. We have come to the end. I have one more interview that's coming up with Alex Craner that is going to be in roughly 30 minutes, I guess. Yeah, roughly 30 minutes. And until then, have a good one. I'll be back in a few. Thanks all. Be safe.